The universe holds countless secrets, but none more terrifying than the truth we refuse to believe. In the spiral arm of the Andromeda sector, where peace has reigned for 3,000 cycles, the greatest mistake a civilization can make is forgetting why that peace exists. This is a story about memory, about fear, and about the day the galaxy remembered what it had tried so hard to forget. Captain Dren Vokaris stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Grace, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace slide past like oil on water. His crystalline exoskeleton caught the ambient light, scattering it across the polished floor in patterns that shifted with every breath. As a member of the Prismati Union, he had spent 40 years navigating the delicate web of galactic politics, ensuring that the fragile alliance between worlds remained intact. Today should have been routine, just another escort mission, ferrying delegates to the central conclave on Meridian Station. But something felt wrong. The ship's AI, a distributed intelligence named Vesper, hummed softly through the speakers. "Captain, we are approaching the exit point. All systems nominal. Delegate quarters report satisfaction with accommodations." "Thank you, Vesper." Dren's voice resonated with harmonics that his species used to convey subtle emotional context. Right now, those harmonics carried unease. He could not explain it, but his sensory nodes had been vibrating with warning signals for the past hour. In 40 years of service, he had learned to trust those instincts. Behind him, the bridge doors whispered open. Ambassador Krill shuffled in, her 6 legs moving in perfect coordination despite her advanced age. The elderly Arachnus dignitary had been attending conclave sessions since before Dren was hatched. Her compound eyes, each segment capable of independent focus, swept across the observation deck before settling on the captain. "You feel it too," she said, her mandibles clicking softly. It was not a question. Dren turned to face her, his faceted eyes reflecting her image 100 times over. "Feel what, Ambassador?" "The change." Krill moved to stand beside him, her breathing spiracles releasing a slight hiss. "I have lived through 4 regime transitions, 2 attempted coups, and the verdant plague that nearly wiped out the botanical collective. Each time, just before the crisis became visible, there was a sensation like this. The universe holding its breath. With respect, Ambassador, you are allowing old fears to color your perception. The galaxy has not seen real conflict in generations. Our treaties hold strong. Trade flows freely. Even the Territorial Disputes Commission has not had a major case in 20 cycles." Krill's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement or concern. "That is exactly what worries me, Captain. Peace is not a natural state. It must be maintained, defended, remembered. But we have become complacent. We treat peace as the default, forgetting what it costs to achieve." Before Dren could respond, Vesper's tone changed sharply. "Captain, I am detecting anomalous readings at our exit coordinates. Multiple energy signatures that do not match any known vessel classification." Dren's exoskeleton darkened instinctively, his species equivalent of paling in fear. "How many?" "Calculating. The interference patterns suggest between 8 and 12 discrete sources, but the energy output is far beyond standard vessel profiles. Captain, these readings are consistent with military-grade weapons platforms, but the design is not in any database." The bridge crew, a mixed species team of 15 individuals, went silent. Ambassador Krill's compound eyes widened, each segment dilating independently. "Military platforms? Impossible. The Weapons Limitation Treaty prohibits any armed vessels larger than a corvette within conclave space." "I am aware of the treaty, Ambassador," Dren said tightly. "Vesper, abort exit sequence. Keep us in hyperspace and run a full diagnostic." This could be a sensor malfunction. Running diagnostics. "Captain, all systems functioning within normal parameters." The readings are genuine. Dren's mind raced through possibilities. Pirates were not unheard of, but they operated tiny raiders, not platforms large enough to register as multiple capital ships. Rogue states existed on the galactic fringe, but none had the industrial capacity to build a fleet. And no one, absolutely no one, would dare violate Conclave space so brazenly. Vesper, can you identify any markers? Hull signatures, energy patterns, anything? Negative, Captain. However, I am detecting a repeating signal embedded in the interference. It appears to be a warning beacon using an extremely old broadcast protocol. Attempting translation. The bridge fell silent again as Vesper worked. Dren could hear the soft whisper of atmospheric recyclers and the barely audible hum of the hyperspace generators. Ambassador Krill had gone completely still, a defensive posture her species adopted when threatened. After what felt like an eternity, Vesper spoke again. Translation complete. The message is fragmentary, but repeating. It reads, "Turn back. Restricted zone. Authorized vessels only. Lethal force authorized. Protocol Deathworld 7. The temperature on the bridge seemed to drop despite the perfectly regulated environment. Dren felt his exoskeleton's surface tension shift, microscopic cracks appearing and sealing in a pattern that indicated extreme stress. Deathworld 7, Ambassador Krill whispered, her voice barely audible. By the first colonies, it cannot be. Ambassador? Dren turned to her, confused by the raw fear in her tone. Krill's legs trembled visibly. Captain, I need you to reverse course immediately. Do not exit hyperspace. Do not approach those coordinates. If what I suspect is true, we have stumbled onto something that should have remained buried forever. You are not making sense. What is Deathworld 7? The ambassador's eyes seemed to lose focus, as if she were looking at something far away, or perhaps deep into the past. It is a designation from the old protocols, the treaty signed when the Conclave was first established. There were 7 worlds classified as death worlds, planets so hostile that no rational species would evolve there, let alone thrive. According to the historical records, 6 of those worlds were confirmed as uninhabitable. But the 7th was different. Dren felt his sensory nodes beginning to throb with warning. Different how? The 7th world was inhabited, Captain, and the species that lived there was unlike anything the galaxy had encountered before. They were aggressive, adaptable, and technologically gifted in ways that terrified the founding members of the Conclave. The old protocols established a quarantine zone around their system. No contact, no trade, no communication, and most importantly, absolute secrecy. The coordinates were removed from all star charts. The very existence of the species was classified at the highest level. That makes no sense, protested Lieutenant Ferrick, the navigation officer. His feathered crest stood on end, betraying his anxiety. Why would the Conclave hide an entire species instead of initiating diplomatic contact? Ambassador Krill finally turned to face the crew, her compound eyes reflecting the swirling colors of hyperspace behind them. Because the founding members were afraid, Lieutenant. Terrified, actually. The species from Deathworld 7 had already begun exploring their local star cluster. They had developed faster-than-light travel independently, and every projection suggested that within a few centuries they would spread across the galaxy like wildfire. But unlike us, they did not spread through cooperation and trade. They spread through conquest and colonization. Surely the Conclave could have defended itself, Dren argued, though his voice lacked conviction. Our combined fleets would outnumber any single species. You misunderstand, Captain. It was not about numbers. It was about mindset. These creatures evolved on a world so hostile that every day was a fight for survival. They developed biology that could withstand radiation, temperature extremes, disease, and trauma that would kill any of us instantly. But more terrifying than their physical abilities was their psychology. They did not just accept conflict as necessary. They embraced it. They studied it. They perfected it over millions of years of constant warfare among themselves. By the time they reached space, they had turned violence into a science. The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances. Vesper's voice cut through the tension. "Captain, the energy signatures are increasing. Multiple vessels are altering course toward our projected exit point. If we maintain current trajectory, we will emerge directly into their formation." Dren made his decision instantly. "Navigation. Plot an emergency exit vector. Take us out of hyperspace in the nearest safe zone, at least 5 light years from those coordinates. Engineering. Prepare for hard deceleration. All hands secure for emergency transition." As the crew scrambled to execute his orders, Ambassador Krill placed one of her legs gently on his shoulder. "There is something else you should know, Captain. The old protocols included a clause that has never been invoked. If the quarantine around Death World 7 was ever breached, if the species was ever detected outside their designated zone, all Conclave members were required to mobilize their full military forces immediately." "You are suggesting we are about to start a war over a myth?" "Not a myth, Captain. A memory we tried to erase. And if those platforms are what I fear they are, then the quarantine has not just been breached. It has been shattered, which means they are out here with us. And they have been for quite some time." The emergency transition from hyperspace felt like being torn apart and reassembled by angry gods. Harmony's grace shuddered violently as reality snapped back into focus, every bolt and weld groaning under the stress of premature deceleration. Dren's crystalline body absorbed the shock better than most, but he still felt hairline fractures spider across his exoskeleton. Around him, crew members stumbled and clutched at their stations, while Vesper's normally calm voice rose several octaves in alarm. "Captain, we have a problem. Multiple problems, actually." The main viewport cleared to reveal a sight that made Dren's sensory nodes go completely numb. They had emerged in what should have been empty space between star systems, a void where nothing existed except cosmic dust and the occasional rogue asteroid. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by structures that defied everything he understood about galactic civilization ships, dozens of them. But calling them ships felt inadequate, like calling a supernova a light. These were floating fortresses, each easily 5 times the size of the largest conclave dreadnought. Their hulls were dark, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, and their surfaces bristled with what could only be weapons arrays. The designs were angular, brutal, efficient in a way that suggested function over aesthetics. No decorative elements, no cultural markings, just pure optimized machinery built for a single purpose. "Vesper, tell me those are derelicts," Dren whispered, knowing even as he spoke that hope was futile. "Negative, Captain. All vessels show active power signatures. Life support systems operational. Weapons charged. They are simply not moving. It appears to be a defensive formation surrounding something at the center." Lieutenant Ferrick's feathers had gone completely flat against his skull, a fear response his species could not control. What could they possibly be defending out here? "There is nothing in this region worth protecting. Zoom in on the center of the formation," Ambassador Krill commanded, her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. Years of diplomatic training allowed her to maintain composure even when every instinct screamed to flee. The viewport shifted, magnifying the heart of the ghost fleet. What they saw there made the entire bridge crew collectively hold their breath. Floating in the precise center of the formation was a habitat structure unlike anything in the Conclave archives. It was enormous, a cylinder rotating slowly to generate artificial gravity. with transparent sections that revealed greenery inside. Actual living plants, not the carefully controlled hydroponic gardens that most species used. Wild, uncontrolled forests visible even from this distance. But that was not the most shocking part. The structure bore markings, symbols that Dr. Vexani had spent months translating from ancient ruins. Symbols that every scholar had assumed were artistic representations of mythical concepts. Except here they were, clearly visible, obviously functional, and very much real. Deathworld 7, Ambassador Krill said quietly. Or as they call it in their own language, Earth. Before anyone could respond, every console on the bridge lit up simultaneously. Vesper's voice took on a strange quality, almost as if another presence had layered itself over the AI's normal speech patterns. Unidentified vessel, you have entered restricted space. Power down all weapons and propulsion systems immediately. Prepare for boarding and inspection. Failure to comply will result in your destruction. You have 30 seconds to acknowledge. Dren's mind raced. Vesper, did that transmission originate from one of those vessels? Negative, Captain. The signal came from inside our own communications array. They have infiltrated our systems without triggering any security protocols. I cannot block them or regain full control. Captain, they are already inside our computer network. The bridge erupted in controlled chaos. The communications officer, a gelatinous being named Solther, frantically attempted to isolate the breach. The security chief, a massive saurian called Grenth, began activating internal defense protocols. But Dren knew, with the certainty of someone who had just realized they were prey, that none of it would matter. Open a channel, he ordered. Let me speak to them. Captain, regulations prohibit communication with potentially hostile forces without conclave authorization. Grenth rumbled, his clawed hand hovering over the weapons console. And regulations also prohibit us from being vaporized without at least attempting diplomacy. Open the channel. A moment of static, then a voice emerged from the speakers. It was strange, carrying harmonics that no conclave species produced naturally. The pitch fluctuated in ways that suggested complex emotional subtext, and the rhythm had an almost predatory quality. But the words themselves were spoken in perfect conclave standard, which somehow made it worse. They had learned the language flawlessly, which meant they had been listening for a very long time. Identify yourself and state your purpose for approaching this facility. Dren straightened, forcing his voice to remain calm. I am Captain Dren Vukoris of the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Grace, registered with the Central Conclave. We are transporting Ambassador Krill to Meridian Station for the quarterly summit. Our presence here is accidental. We detected anomalous readings and emerged from hyperspace to investigate. Silence stretched for 5 seconds, 10, 15. Each moment felt like an eternity. Then the voice returned, and this time Dren could hear something that might have been amusement beneath the words. You are lying, Captain. Your vessel altered course specifically to avoid our perimeter defenses. You executed an emergency transition that damaged your hyperspace generators. These are not the actions of someone investigating anomalies. These are the actions of someone who knows exactly what they almost encountered and chose to flee. So I will ask again, more precisely this time. Who told you about this facility? And what were your actual orders? Ambassador Krill stepped forward, her diplomatic training finally overriding her fear. This is Ambassador Krill of the Arachnus Collective, senior delegate to the Central Conclave. I invoke diplomatic immunity under the Treaty of Universal Rights. We have no hostile intentions. Our presence here violates no current conclave laws, as this region of space is not claimed by any member state. Another pause, shorter this time. When the voice returned, the amusement had been replaced by something colder. Ambassador, diplomatic immunity is a concept that exists within your conclave. We are not members of your conclave. We have never signed your treaties. And this region of space, while unclaimed by your member states, was designated as restricted under protocols established 3,000 years ago. Protocols that your conclave agreed to maintain in exchange for our continued isolation. By entering this space, you have violated those protocols. Now you will answer my questions, or you will discover exactly why your ancestors feared us enough to hide our existence from their descendants. Lieutenant Farrick's voice cracked with panic. Captain, I am reading power buildup in the weapons arrays of the nearest vessels. They are targeting our reactor core and life support systems. Precision strikes designed to disable, not destroy. Dren felt something shift inside him. Fear was giving way to a strange clarity. They were going to die here, vaporized by weapons wielded by a species that should not exist, in a region of space that officially contained nothing of interest. No one would ever know what happened. The Conclave would send search parties eventually, but they would find only debris, if that. The truth would remain buried, unless he could somehow change the equation. You want to know who told us? Dren said, his voice suddenly steady. The universe told us. Your beacon transmitted on old frequencies. Your energy signatures appeared on our sensors. Your presence became impossible to hide. You can kill us, yes. Your weapons are clearly superior. Your technology exceeds ours in ways I cannot begin to understand. But you cannot kill the truth. Other ships will come. Other sensors will detect your fleet. You can murder us, but you cannot maintain secrecy any longer. Silence. Then, unexpectedly, a sound came through the speakers. It took Dren several seconds to identify it, because it was so alien to galactic diplomatic protocols. Laughter. The voice on the other end was laughing. A sound that carried genuine amusement mixed with something that might have been respect. Captain Vocarus, you have exactly the kind of courage that gets people killed in fascinating ways. Or promoted. Sometimes both. Very well. You have 3 hours to repair your hyperspace generators. During that time, you will remain in place. You will not attempt to transmit messages. You will not deploy any probes or shuttles. You will simply exist quietly while we decide what to do with you. If you violate any of these conditions, we will disable your vessel and take you aboard for extended questioning. If you comply, we may allow you to leave with your lives and a message to deliver to your conclave. Do you understand these terms? I understand, Dren replied, though his mind was already racing ahead. 3 hours. They had 3 hours to somehow survive an encounter with the species that had terrified the galaxy into creating an elaborate conspiracy of silence. 3 hours to figure out who these humans really were and what they wanted. Excellent. One more thing, Captain. The ambassador was correct. We are not myths. We are not legends. We are humans, and we have been watching your conclave for 3,000 years. We have studied your species. We have learned your languages. We have monitored your transmissions. And we have been very, very patient. But patience has limits. Your intrusion here suggests that perhaps the time for isolation has ended. Perhaps it is time for the galaxy to remember what it forgot. Sleep well, Captain Vocarus. You may wake to a very different universe. The channel closed with an audible click, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Ambassador Krill sank slowly onto her leg joints, her compound eyes unfocused. By the first colonies, they have been watching us. All this time, every diplomatic summit, every trade negotiation, every cultural exchange, they have been listening. Dren turned to his crew, seeing his own fear reflected in every face, every posture, every involuntary species-specific stress response. But beneath the fear, he also saw something else. Curiosity, wonder. The universe had just become infinitely larger and more dangerous than any of them imagined. And somehow, impossibly, they were still alive. "All right," he said, forcing strength into his voice. "We have 3 hours. Ferric, get those generators operational. Sulfur, monitor all communications, but do not transmit anything. Grenth, security protocols remain active, but weapons stay cold. Ambassador, I need everything you know about the old protocols and these humans. Vesper, analyze every scrap of data you collected. I want to know everything about those ships, that habitat, and our new friends who enjoy threatening people with such eloquence." As the crew scattered to their tasks, Dren returned to the viewport, staring at the dark shapes of the human fleet. Somewhere in that habitat, humans were living their lives, breathing their poison atmosphere, thriving in conditions that would kill most conclave species within minutes. And they had been doing it for 3,000 years, hidden in plain sight, waiting for something. The question that terrified him most was simple. Waiting for what? The hours crawled by like wounded creatures, each minute stretching into an eternity of tension and whispered conversations. Dren found himself pacing the observation deck, his crystalline body refracting the dim emergency lighting into scattered rainbows across the walls. Around him, the crew worked with desperate efficiency, knowing that their lives depended on completing repairs before the invisible deadline expired. Ambassador, Krill had retreated to the conference room with every historical data file Vesper could retrieve. Dren joined her there as the second hour began, finding the elderly diplomat surrounded by holographic displays showing fragments of ancient documents, treaties written in languages so old that the translation algorithms struggled to parse them accurately. "Look at this," Krill said without preamble, gesturing to a particular document. "This is from the founding of the Conclave, the original charter. There is a section here that has always been classified, accessible only to the highest-ranking ambassadors. I gained clearance only 15 years ago, and even then, I thought it was merely historical paranoia." Dren studied the text, watching as Vesper highlighted key passages. The language was formal, almost ritualistic, but the meaning was clear enough. The founding members of the Conclave had encountered a species that challenged every assumption they held about civilization and progress. A species that had developed technology rivaling their own, despite being confined to a single hostile world. A species that saw the universe not as a garden to be tended, but as a frontier to be conquered. "They tried to make contact," Krill continued, her voice heavy with emotion. "The first diplomatic mission approached Earth with full honors, expecting to welcome a new member into the galactic community. Do you know what happened?" Dren shook his head, transfixed by the scrolling text. The humans assumed it was an invasion. They had been watching our ships for decades, learning our movements, and when we finally approached their world, they interpreted it as the opening move of a war. They launched everything they had, primitive missiles and kinetic weapons, even kamikaze attacks where pilots deliberately crashed their ships into ours. Krill's compound eyes glistened. 17 of our ships were destroyed before we could even transmit our peaceful intentions. Thousands died. And when we finally established communication, when we explained that we came in peace, do you know what their leaders said? "What?" they said. "We apologize for the misunderstanding. We thought you were enemies. If you had been, we would have won. Not sorry for the deaths, not remorseful about the violence. Just a simple statement of fact delivered with absolute confidence. They had fought the combined might of 7 spacefaring civilizations to a standstill, using technology they had developed in complete isolation. And they believed, truly believed, that if we had been hostile, they would have emerged victorious." Dren felt his exoskeleton grow cold. That level of confidence, of aggression, it is not sustainable. It would lead to constant conflict. That is what the Conclave founders thought. So they made a choice. Instead of risking integration with a species that might destabilize everything we had built, they offered a deal. The humans would receive the coordinates of uninhabited star systems where they could expand. They would receive technology to accelerate their development. In exchange, they would remain isolated from the broader galactic community. No contact, no trade, no cultural exchange. They would be given room to grow, but contained within boundaries we established. And they agreed? Dren found that difficult to believe. They negotiated, Krill corrected. For 10 years, human diplomats argued every point, challenged every restriction, demanded justifications for every limitation. But eventually, they accepted the terms. Not because they feared us, but because they recognized that their own nature made them dangerous to others. They understood what they were, Captain, and they chose isolation to protect us from themselves. The implications settled over Dren like a heavy blanket. 3,000 years of isolation, watching us, studying us, all while remaining hidden. What kind of species has that much discipline? Before Krill could answer, Vesper's voice filled the room. Captain, the hyperspace generators are operational. However, I am detecting movement in the human fleet. 3 vessels are breaking formation and approaching our position. Dren rushed back to the bridge, arriving just as the viewport adjusted to show the approaching ships. They were smaller than the fortress vessels guarding the habitat, but still massive by conclave standards. As they drew closer, Dren could see details that made his analytical mind race with questions. The hulls were covered in what looked like impact scars and heat scoring. These ships had seen combat, real combat, not simulated exercises or ceremonial displays. Incoming transmission, Solther announced, his gelatinous form pulsing with nervous energy. The same voice from before filled the bridge, but this time there was a visual component. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the interior of a human ship. And there, standing in what appeared to be a command center, was a human. Dren had seen images in the ancient files, artistic representations and blurry surveillance footage. But nothing had prepared him for the reality. The human was tall, just as the records indicated, with pale skin and dark hair cut short. The face was symmetrical, in a way that most species found aesthetically pleasing, but the eyes were what captured Dren's attention. Forward-facing predator eyes, dark and intelligent, that seemed to catalog everything they saw with ruthless efficiency. The human wore a uniform of dark blue with subtle insignia that suggested military rank. When he spoke, his mouth moved in, ways that revealed those sharp teeth the old stories mentioned. But his posture was relaxed, almost casual, one hand resting on the back of a chair. Captain Vocarus, Ambassador Krill, my name is Commander Jackson Pierce of the Earth Defense Fleet. I apologize for the aggressive welcome earlier. We do not receive many visitors, and our protocols tend toward the paranoid. Your repairs are complete, and you are free to leave. However, I would like to extend an invitation first. Dren found his voice, though it took effort. What kind of invitation? Come aboard my ship. Bring the ambassador and 2 others of your choosing. We will provide environmental suits suitable for your species, and I will show you what humanity has become during our long isolation. I think you will find it enlightening. And when you return to your conclave, you will have a message to deliver. One that comes not from myths or legends, but from direct experience. Every instinct Dren possessed screamed danger. But another part of him, the part that had chosen a career in diplomacy precisely because he wanted to understand alien minds, felt an overwhelming curiosity. This was a chance to see what no one in the conclave had seen for 3 millennia. To understand the speciest had been hidden away like a dangerous secret. If we refuse? He asked, needing to know. Commander Pierce smiled, an expression that showed those sharp teeth clearly. Then you leave with your lives and our gratitude for respecting the time limit we imposed. No strings attached, Captain. We do not take hostages or force compliance. That would be the action of people who fear they cannot convince others through honest dialogue. We prefer to let our achievements speak for themselves. Ambassador Krill stepped forward, her diplomatic instincts overriding her fear. Commander Pierce, if we accept this invitation, what assurances do we have for our safety? My word, Pierce replied simply. I know that sounds inadequate. Your species value contracts and treaties, formal documents with binding clauses. We value those things too, but among humans, personal honor still carries weight. I give you my word that you will be treated as honored guests, shown what you wish to see, and return to your vessel unharmed. If that isn't sufficient, I understand your refusal. Dren looked at Krill, seeing his own internal struggle reflected in her posture. They were diplomats. Their entire purpose was to bridge gaps between species, to find common ground where none seemed to exist. How could they refuse the chance to do exactly that, even with a species their ancestors had feared? We accept, Dren said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his exoskeleton. Ambassador Krill, Lieutenant Ferrick, and Security Chief Grenth will accompany me. Excellent. A shuttle will dock with your vessel in 20 minutes. I look forward to meeting you in person, Captain. Oh, and one more thing. You asked earlier what kind of species has the discipline to remain isolated for 3,000 years while watching the galaxy develop without them. Pierce's smile widened slightly. The answer is simple. The kind of species that understands the difference between strength and cruelty, between confidence and arrogance. We are not the monsters your ancestors feared. We are something far more interesting. We are what happens when warriors choose to become gardeners, when predators decide to protect rather than hunt. We are human, and it is time the galaxy remembered what that truly means. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in contemplative silence. Dren turned to his chosen companions, seeing the same mixture of fear and excitement he felt. They were about to cross a threshold that had remained closed for 3,000 years. They were about to discover whether the old fears were justified, or whether humanity had transcended the savage nature that had once made them seem so terrifying. As the shuttle approached, a small angular craft that moved with predatory grace, Dren found himself thinking about the gardens visible inside the human habitat. Plants growing wild, untamed, thriving in controlled chaos. Perhaps that was the key to understanding these humans. They had learned to channel their aggressive nature into creation rather than destruction, to use their formidable abilities for building instead of breaking. Or perhaps that was wishful thinking. Perhaps behind the diplomatic words and polite invitations, they were still the apex predators that had made the galaxy's founders lose sleep. Perhaps the gardens were just camouflage for something far more dangerous. In a few hours, Dren would have his answer. And the galaxy, whether it was ready or not, would finally learn the truth about the species that had been hidden in the shadows for 3 millennia. The species called human. The species that had transformed from the galaxy's greatest fear into its most carefully guarded secret, the shuttle, docked with a gentle thud that resonated through harmonies. Grace. Dren straightened his uniform, checked that his translation device was functioning properly, and prepared to meet the legends face to face. Behind him, his crew watched with a mixture of hope and dread. Ahead of him, beyond the airlock, waited answers to questions the galaxy had stopped asking long ago. It was time to remember. It was time to learn. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to forgive the old fears and build something new.